Welcome to the Everyday PM podcast, the podcast where we discuss project management principles for your everyday life. My name is Campea, and I'm a certified project/program manager with a decade of experience working for healthcare, retail, consumer goods, and tech industries. I'm so excited to welcome George Pitagorsky, who is globally recognized as a project and process management thought leader, and he integrates mindfulness and process thinking into his work to improve individual and team performance. He's spoken at global conferences for Microsoft and Nokia. He's also the author of the first project management book I purchased at the beginning of my career, the Zen Approach to Project Management. George, I am so excited to welcome you to the Everyday PM. Please take a moment to introduce yourself to those who have not met you.
Hi, I'm glad to be here. As for I've been in the project management, process management realm since the early 1970s, and before that, a computer programmer, which is kind of in the same vein. And I've at the same time been very actively involved in the application of mindful awareness and related teachings and practices. And bringing them into the day-to-day. Just as the title of this show says, you can bring project management into day-to-day. On top of that, you can bring mindful awareness and the things that go along with it, thinking styles, similar to methodologies in project management, for example. So that's been my work for the last, 40 years or so. I'm old, so. And my feeling is that we need to bring all of that stuff in to create a balance in our lives and to dynamically balance so that we're like surfers or tightrope walkers and capable of adapting and having the resilience that we need to face anything that might come up.
Yeah, I agree. And early on in my career, when I purchased this book, it really struck me. It made such a big impact on me personally, because the things that you convey in the book really tie everything together, as you said, all the things that we learn as project managers and how we interact with people. And then ultimately, how do you keep your composure in those really stressful, high pressure meetings when decisions need to be made, and you as the project manager are being looked upon as the person to progress things and move things forward. And what I'll say is that there's always going to be that one either piece of literature or that mentor or somebody who's kind of made an impact on you. And I would say, George, that's why I'm so excited that you're here with us today, because I would say that is you and your book for me as I started my career. So, I mean, the reason why it resonated with me is because early on, I think nobody really tells you as a project manager that majority of your job is dealing with personalities and people. Yes, exactly. And it's something that is very hard to teach, that emotional intelligence, right? So it's working with different types of people, and it's this idea of this coupled with, we can find our center and our balance in terms of our expectations and our performance, which is what you talk about in the book. So I, amongst my peers, have always been known as the one that's calm under pressure. So when I read your book, I thought, oh, this guy is way ahead. He's so progressive in this idea of bringing the Zen approach to project management. And I was just so happy to have found this book. So George, I want to start with, you have a ton of experience, a plethora of experience, as you've outlined in your introductory, from project, program, process, product management. How did you become a project manager? Was it something that you fell into or something that you always knew you were going to be?
No, fell into is more like is what happened. I was a computer programmer back in the mid 60s, and I had a job that ended up putting me in a position to develop and or maintain software that was used in managing a project. And the project was the Polaris Poseidon program at Sperry Systems Management Division. So I was working with this guy who was like a really expert project manager. And this is way before PMI came around. Sure. and all of that. This guy was an expert project manager. And I learned project management. I said, hey, this is better than programming. It's not that I love programming, but stayed in the tech field. But I found that working with people and dealing with the issues and the processes that get in the way of all of the technical work being effective was my cup of tea. So
Yeah,
that's how I got into it. Yeah.
You fell in like so many, right? And
Yeah.
like you said, ahead of things like PMI, which then started to put forth, the body of knowledge. Here's your guidance of how to be a project manager. So I can't even imagine being in that space where there was not a lot of defined processes industry wide, and you kind of had to create your own. Was that something, is that kind of where you started to realize you can take the 40 years of studies and practice in yoga and Tai Chi and meditation and kind of meld these two ideas together? Or what was that point for you?
It actually was a combination of things. At that time, there was, well before the 1960s, there was a body of knowledge around project management. It's nothing new. It goes back to the pyramids, basically. People were managing projects, millennia ago. So I was fortunate enough to learn from some really super experts in the field who were working at Sperry at that time and on this gigantic, global project, the program really. So I had the training was there, the knowledge was there, and the integration of the people side of it started to come into play for me when I became involved in a startup, in a software development and design startup, which was primarily a consulting company. And I was one of the founders. And as a founder, the most difficult aspect of the work was dealing with the people.
Yeah.
And you dealing with them in an authoritarian kind of way was impossible. We were talking about the early 1970s and when that company got started. And you didn't tell programmers what to do. I mean, these were very independent thinkers. So, and myself included. So we accommodated and brought in the people side of it, and particularly as consultants, it becomes and project managers, to my mind, in larger organizations are in effect consultants, whether they're working internally as an employee or as an outside consultant. They have to cultivate this quality of being able to deal with stakeholders, clients, colleagues, both in and outside of the project. The whole group that we refer to as stakeholders have to be dealt with in a very conscious way. Otherwise, all of the good work that you might do in terms of planning and execution goes to naught. It's useless unless you have the people behind you. So that's how I got into that aspect of it. And I think many of us have a propensity towards one thing or another. So I have a propensity towards dealing with interpersonal issues and that realm, as well as being analytical. But I've worked with many, many people, particularly in the technology field, who are not particularly good at the social skills.
Yeah. Yes. And you said that in a very kind way. I appreciate the way you said it's true though. And I think it's important that people recognize that our profession as PMs, it's not for everybody. It's not everybody's cup of tea. And for that reason, there's just some folks who just prefer to be either individual contributors or they're just not as socially, I don't know, apt to do this type of job. But you bring up something that's really interesting. You were a programmer that became a project manager, and you were on projects where you had to directly deal with programmers, people that were doing the job that you came from. So was that an interesting experience for you? Did that work in your favor, the fact that you came from programming and then had to be a project manager to these people?
Yes, in those days, it was, for me, very important because not only was I a project manager, but also a designer and like a person who was, I wasn't doing programming at that time, but I was heavily involved in the technical side of things, making sure that the testing was being done properly and all of that work. And the respect that you get when people know that you are competent in their realm is great.
Right.
So it helps a lot to have that. But over the years, I found that you can't have that knowledge base any longer. The expertise in the particular technical field, which doesn't have to be tech, it could be retail, management or whatever it is. You can't have that degree of intense knowledge and experience across this broad span of of all of the things that go on in a large project. So
Sure.
you start to, again, more rely on the interpersonal aspect of it, to recognize that it's okay to say, well, I don't know about that. Tell me.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, and then to translate whatever is being told into a language that is understood by the non-expert.
Agreed.
Yeah, and it's not just technology, it's any field of specialization that we have to integrate into our project work.
Oh yeah, I've dealt with the creative side, the marketing side, where I typically say I will never be an expert in what you do, which is where I think we can really help each other. And you have a good piece of guidance there that I want to make sure isn't lost, which is it's always important to understand what your team members do. You don't necessarily need to become a programmer and project manager like yourself, George, but if you at least take a step back and observe what your programmers do, so that when you do have a conversation with them, there's this level of understanding and also mutual respect that can happen. And so oftentimes as project managers, we come in and we just kind of want to go and not take that time, take that moment to really understand each of our team members who we're working with. And I think that's a really important piece of advice from you.
Yeah, and what are their difficulties? What are the things that get in their way of doing whatever it is that they do effectively? That's where the project manager comes into play as a guide and as a protector. Keeping the wolves out of the the hen house or whatever so I don't know. I live in New York City. We don't have any wolves. So I think the point is that we need to cultivate those skills. And at the same time, I want to also point out to something that that was implied earlier, that a lot of people who don't have kind of native social skills can learn them. They can become at least more appreciative of their importance.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. They might never become, like a social worker or a psychotherapist or something like that, but at least they'll have a sense that it's important to make other people happy, as opposed to just, put on the blinders and do my programming or whatever it is that one is doing.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes sense. Agreed. So you have the countless years of experience in project management. I want to kind of go to the other side of it, where you have countless years in your practices, like as we mentioned, right, in yoga and meditation, things like that. Where was that point where they intersect? Is that something that just kind of fluidly came together on its own?
Well, it kind of fluidly came together in the early 1970s, but maybe 1972, something like that. My wife had a thyroid issue, and somebody said, "Well, you should do yoga." This is 1972. What was yoga? And we were fortunate in having someone who was giving a yoga class in our neighborhood. And so both of us took these yoga classes, and the teacher was kind of an old, not so old at that time, a young hippie who had come out of a yogic training of a particular style. And he was like this font of knowledge about the nature of this whole unfolding that was, for me, that kind of integrated yoga and Buddhism and Tai Chi Chuan and, like all of the Eastern traditions and some of the Western Gnostic traditions. So that's kind of hooked me. Like this was kind of great. And at the same time, I was in business doing project work. And you started to get the idea that, the two things don't fit together. So I dropped out for like a couple of years. I said, I'm more interested in making my mind work than I am in, like in making some bank, do a better job at, counting money or whatever. Right. So I left for a couple of years and took my family, across country a couple of times and attended retreats and trainings, in particular at that time in Tibetan Buddhism. Mm-hmm. And I was introduced not only to Tibetan Buddhism, but to other styles of meditation. And so that, kind of struck me as being this incredibly wonderful experience. It's like beyond a blessing. And I learned in that time that the two things, the material realm that we work in as project managers and business people, and the so-called spiritual realm are not separate from one another. Mm-hmm. As soon as we separate them from one another, then we lose the point. The point is bringing the spiritual, bringing the mindfulness, the awareness into day-to-day life and living day-to-day life in a very practical, reasonable, hopefully compassionate and effective way.
Yeah.
So, you study a little bit of the idea, one of the ideas behind the Zen project management, or the Zen approach to project management, is the idea that in the Zen tradition, there are Zen arts, doing something with great precision, recognizing that you're attempting to perfect it, but at the same time, that its perfection is not going to happen. Mm-hmm. And you use whatever it is that's going on. The old saying of chopping wood and carrying water is what happens after you've kind of realized what your mind is all about. So it's coming back into the world and being able to integrate mindfulness meditation, the awareness of interdependence amongst all of us and all of our environments, recognizing the idea of what process is, this mm-hmm. flow of things that are happening, and it never stops. Right. So there's this constancy of movement, and as soon as we try to to fixate it, as soon as we try to put it in a box of some sort, we start to become less effective. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that hopefully motivates one who is mindful of that to step back and see, how can I move with this flow, with this process? How can I recognize the nature of process from the point of view of, if I do something, it's going to have an effect. Mm-hmm. Is it going to be a positive effect or a negative effect? And maybe I can't even tell. So we start to do what a project manager might do in terms of planning. You plan, right. But you recognize that the plan is not going to actually make things happen. It's predictive to some degree, but it's never 100% accurate. And right. It's kind of this, this thing that you put out there and helps you to some degree. But now, if you recognize what process is all about, there has to be change. So we have change management. There's great uncertainty. So what do we have? We have risk management. There are people. And speaking for myself, people are crazy. It's like they're totally unpredictable. They have all of these emotions and stuff.
It's true.
Habits, mental habits, and what have you. I'm sure, maybe somebody that's listening is perfect, but probably not. So we have all of that to deal with. And, so that implies now communications management, human resource management, managing vendors, and all of that. So it's, to me, it became very obvious that project management is a Zen art if we treat it that way. And it now becomes a forum for training, for one's own personal training, to let go of anything that might get in the way of what I refer to as optimal living.
Yeah, agreed. I that all resonates with me, obviously, and hopefully with our audience as well. And then that's the connectivity that I made, and when I was reading through your book as well, is that it's just a no-brainer. They go together. This is the Zen approach is, it should be what project managers, how they perceive their work and how they integrate with the process and the flow, like you're talking about. And it's interesting you bring up the people part, because I'm taking this meditation, 10 minutes a day meditation thing. It's all a part of the October, I think, is Mental Health Awareness Month. And with the environment being the way it is and mental health kind of being such a top priority for a lot of us that are working from home, et cetera. One of the things that I listened to yesterday that I meditated on, which was really interesting, is thinking about what your stakeholder is thinking about, which the example they gave is somebody cuts you off on the road. And instead of being like, oh, screw you, why did you do that? And very angry, consider what their perspective was. Why did they cut you off? Are they on their way to the hospital, or is somebody injured? They're trying to get to them. And so kind of reversing that perspective of that frame of mind that you typically would have, let's say, if you're a project manager sitting in a very heated debate amongst your team, how can you then take that, what you're talking about, understand the Zen approach of it, and really kind of insert yourself in that way to sometimes even diffuse situations where there's a lot of tension. So you make that connection, or yes,
or not insert yourself, and simply observe it and realize that it'll, it many times will resolve itself. So it's that constant playing with no rules. One of the things that I bring out in this book is that we're in, we have no ground. There's no, there's nothing that's going to basically be solid. Everything is in movement. Everything is in process. So keeping that in mind gives us a great deal of flexibility, because we realize that, sometimes you insert yourself, sometimes you don't insert yourself, depending on what is happening in the moment in the process. So it's that kind of mindset. I also want to say that when the title, The Zen Approach to Project Management, was being discussed, I wrote this book in 2007, I think.
Yep,
so
2007.
that's a while ago. And at the time, I had some second thoughts about that title. I thought, it's a great title, and everybody knows about Zen, but I'm not a Zen practitioner particularly. I was trained in other styles of meditation, and they all come together. And it's not that I'm ignorant of the Zen approach, but I'm not I don't wear black robes and the Zen thing. So, so I had that, and then there's this. We put a label on something. So Zen is a label, and it's a label for something that's extremely profound. But because it's a label, it gets certain sets of connotations. So someone who, let's say, was into very serious Christian kind of background might be turned off by this idea of Zen, because it's it's Buddhist. So I was talked by the publisher, talked me into saying, Zen is a good title, and I think it is a good title. And at the same time, I always want to bring out, and these days I'm more branding around self-awareness.
Sure.
Which has got less of a spiritual overtone to it, but it's still the same stuff. So I think we need to be careful when we talk about a given approach, that the approach is it's a vehicle. And we
Yeah,
want to use our understanding of flexibility and resilience and all of that as a means to make sure that that vehicle is still working for us. And
sure.
how we start letting go of the labels and just really deal with the essence of it, which is experiential.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
experiential. It's, like one knows when they're in a, like having a Zen moment or a moment of flow. It's an experience. You give it a name and already you're out of the experience.
Yeah.
And the
Agreed.
name is going to not be sufficient to really describe the experience.
Yeah.
And paradoxically, it's also necessary to give it a name, because that kind of brings people into an understanding more easily. So it's, it's an interesting, I find that, talking and teaching about this realm is like more fascinating than managing projects.
Yeah. Yeah. I just enjoy listening to you teaching us about this. I think it's and very, I think that is really important to say, is that throughout the book, there may be nods to different types of the practices that you've learned and picked up throughout your career. But at the core of it is just about understanding yourself and being centered and balanced. And I remember, I think part of the book you talk about, if you're ever in a meeting and you feel like you're off balance, just make sure you settle your feet onto the floor and just kind of feel your center and your balance. And it's going back to this idea of what you're talking about, which isn't necessarily grounded in Zen and Buddhism, but it's just, to your point, self-awareness, understanding who you are and how you feel.
Yeah, exactly. So, and all of it, I think, for those who are interested in just perfecting their project management capability, these are skills and concepts that are integral to optimal performance. It's not spiritual in any regard, to the extent that it's leaving the realm of reality and going into something else. It's applying very skillful means to doing whatever it is that you want to do.
Yeah, exactly. And it's taking what you're saying and not necessarily taking them as a belief, but to your point, understanding them and making them your own, whatever it is that however you want to convey them as you lead your projects. And that's essentially how I read your book and took that away from it as well.
The essence of it. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I hope that the audience will, if they haven't already read this, will be able to pick up a copy as well and be able to understand some of these principles, because to your earlier point, the point of this community is understanding how project management principles can apply to your everyday life. There's a lot of teachings in here and guidance as well, and tips that you put out, George, that are very applicable, not only to project management, but just to your everyday life in a stressful situation. Understand how you can be grounded. You do such a great job of having those aha moments throughout the book, and they're kind of like labeled in those gray boxes, but these areas of reflection to think about. And I think that will be helpful for our community, even if they're project managers or not.
Yeah. I think that's part of the intent, was to show that the things that you do in project management, the things you do at home in your family, or wherever socially you're involved, there's no difference fundamentally between those things. Again, it's people trying to accomplish something, usually collaboratively. There's the same stuff is going on. Day-to-day project management, day-to-day mindful awareness.
Yeah. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that in addition to the Zen book, I started to write a series, and I wrote a book on conflict management and one on expectations management, both with an orientation around project managers. And it's the same principles now being applied in a more narrowly focused way.
That's
so, great. We know that there are conflicts in projects. We know that.
No. Every project is perfect.
Yeah. And, I make the point in that book that says that a perfect project should and does include conflict.
Hmm.
Because if you don't have it, it's an indication that people are probably not thinking out of the box in some way. They're not,
Right.
there's no synthesis of ideas coming through the conflict.
Right.
So
Right.
that becomes an important element of, again, applying mindful awareness to the management of disagreements, relationships, and so forth. And then expectations management comes into play because we are setting, we do planning. Planning sets expectations for other people and perhaps for ourselves.
Right.
And we have to remember that, you can have all the expectations you want, but whether they're going to actually come to fruition is a whole other question.
Yeah.
How do you manage that? And again, it's the same principles. There's change, inevitable. So build that into your expectations and don't be stuck with something that is impossible to achieve. So
Hmm.
it's that, and that goes for everything that we do.
Hmm. Yeah.
So yeah, it's good stuff.
Is there any type of particular practice or meditation that you do on your during your everyday that
Yeah.
we can use as everyday
Yeah.
project managers that you would want to kind of teach us in this session?
Absolutely. The basic practice that's foundation for my work is a mindfulness practice. It's also known as insight meditation. And its purpose is to cultivate a combination of concentration and mindfulness, where mindfulness is looking out with an expansive view, and concentration is focusing in a more narrow way. So we have that combination of things, and this particular technique, which is very simple, cultivates both of those qualities. So how does one do that? It's basically the basic practice. And again, there are many different styles and variations on the theme. But the basic practice is to simply, and you can do this right now, take an erect and relaxed posture.
I have terrible posture, by the way. So
Well,
okay.
Again, relaxed is more important than erect, but erect is also useful. So if one has a terrible posture, it's likely that they're going to end up with crinks in their neck or their back, or not be as energized as possible.
Yeah.
So anyway,
right.
So we find this comfortable posture. It could be anything, but we try to make it comfortably erect. So there's a little bit of dignity associated with this. And then eyes can be closed or open. And it's often easier to start with eyes closed, but it depends on the individual. So eyes closed or open, but not looking at anything if they're open. Just a general gaze, or if your eyes are closed, just feeling the darkness, but not getting caught up in any of the mind's works, the thoughts. And then bring your awareness to the sensations of your body. Just feel the weight of your body against the chair, the air against your skin. And just note these sensations. And bring into play the sensations of your breath, the rising and falling of your chest or abdomen, wherever it's most prevalent for you. Just focus on the sensations of the breath. And take note of any thoughts that might come up, any physical sensations, feelings, external sounds, visual images, anything that might come up in or around you. Just notice it. And if you find yourself distracted, being pulled into any of those things that are coming up, as soon as you realize that you become distracted, bring your attention back to the breath, back to the sensations of the breath and body. And begin again, just opening, allowing, noticing. And practicing that for, any period of time, practicing it for, you've mentioned 10 minutes is a start. My personal practice is to do a half an hour every day, minimum. And we call that formal meditation practice. But then there's the integration of that into day-to-day life, moment-to-moment practice. So you mentioned before, you're at a meeting and you're starting to become distracted. You feel the sensations of your feet and on the ground, or the sensations of your breath. And now you're immediately present. Immediately, you're now able to observe the feelings and the thoughts that are arising. It might only last for a second, but you start to become aware and cognizant of the fact that there's a difference between being present and aware and being lost in any number of distractions.
Sure.
And it's that integration, that moment-to-moment mindfulness, that's the most important. Often to do it most effectively, one needs a formal practice of some sort. And it doesn't have to be anything more than like a few minutes a day. Another practice that I give to students is I call it the 3 rings practice. The telephone rings. As soon as it rings the first time, you now use that as a signal to take your posture, to feel your body, to feel your breath. Second ring, simply listening. Third ring, pick it up. Or let it go to voicemail, whatever it is that you want to do. So that's kind of a formal practice.
Yeah.
But it's something that takes, seconds. And doing it every day, over and over again, starts to build this muscle of being mindfully aware. And the more mindfully aware we are, the more effective we get. Then I find it's necessary to remind people that assassins are very mindfully aware, very focused.
Yeah.
We don't consider them to be the most compassionate and ethical people in the world. Yeah. So we have to add to this practice of mindfulness meditation some kind of ethical grounding, some kind of an understanding of what our intentions are in this interdependent realm of, whether it's project management or community or what have you. What are our intentions? And is our behavior in keeping with those intentions?
Yeah.
I might have a great intention to save the country or the world from whatever. And if I'm trying to get that through violence or through lies or whatever other, what I would consider unethical means, then, where am I? Awareness of that. So it's bringing together those components, the mindfulness, the meditation, the wisdom, the intention, and the understanding of how things are, and skillful behavior. Those things coming together now provide a platform for optimal living.
Incredible. This has been amazing, George. I think I could obviously talk your ear off and listen to you teach us everything that you've learned in your career. I think that was incredible, though. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah.
So if anybody's interested, I do coaching, and I have a website. It's called self-awareliving.com, self-awareliving.com. And there are videos on there that teach different levels of mindfulness meditation, and you can sign up for a newsletter that it's called the Breakthrough Newsletter, that I talk about these kinds of things. And I also do a monthly article for Project Management Times, which again integrates project management with these concepts.
Wonderful. Well, yes, I'm looking forward to absorbing all of the content you have out there, obviously.
Sure.
Big fan, like I said, and hopefully the audience has learned a thing or two about this integration of being self-aware and understanding where you are as a project manager. So George, it's been such a pleasure and an honor to have you on the podcast today. You've kind of plugged all of the areas that folks can find you, but please feel free to follow George on any type of social media that you might have as well.
LinkedIn,
website, LinkedIn. Okay, fantastic. So yeah, George is on LinkedIn. So please take a moment to follow him and continue the conversation with him, as well as I'm sure I will, because I'm so interested in this area and fascinated in this area. So George, thank you so much for your time today. For those that want to support the Everyday PM podcast, you can do so by clicking subscribe to your Apple Podcast, Spotify, Google Podcast, whatever podcasting platform you listen in on. The Everyday PM podcast is available there. We'll also have the video version of this up, so you can actually see George and I have this conversation on my YouTube channel, youtube.com/Ann Campea. And you can follow me on LinkedIn as well if you want to continue the conversation and join the Everyday PM community. Again, so that will do it for George and I in this installment of the Everyday PM podcast. Thank you guys so much for joining us. And until next time, take care.